Good morning and welcome. Thank you for joining us here for the Recruitment in 2021 panel series presented by TENTEN Partners. We have here today our special guest, Esther Khor, the co-founder of TENTEN Partners. Welcome.
Good to see you.
And Michael Treasure from Rakuten Mobile. Welcome.
Thank you very much.
And Helen Duce from Include Consulting, who also happens to be the founder of Lean in Singapore. Welcome.
Thank you.
And we have Alex Yu from DBS. Thank you for joining us.
Yep.
And Stephanie Tan, good morning. And you're from Rakuten Mobile.
Yes, good morning to you. Thanks.
Thanks for joining us. So I want to start off today to talk really about the tumultuous year 2020 has been in the recruitment industry. And now that we're at the start of 2021, Esther, could you tell us a little bit more about how COVID has impacted the HR function and hiring practices? What are you seeing?
Yeah, sure. I mean, for my side, I'm a recruitment agency, right? So I think when COVID hit and when the circuit breaker in Singapore hit, earlier last year, it was business was almost at a standstill. Most clients are very, very careful. In their hiring, and then they relook at their plan. You look at the economy, generally. But however, because of the nature of what we do and what we recruit for, mostly in the digital transformation space, fintech space, this start to really, really pick up. It's definitely at the back of the rate of adoption, right? Everybody's going digital during COVID. Everybody stays at home, and online shopping whatsoever. Everything there's a spike in that. So the market starts to open up for us in terms of recruitment, especially in the technology space. It spiked basically in I would say Q3, and Q4 was extremely busy and straight through to this year. So very, very busy period, really, and of course, I'm sure the rest of the guys will share with you that because most of us are now doing interviews on Zoom, Microsoft Teams, on video, that it's actually become more productive.
So you're finding that digital function is playing such an important role that it's actually making things much more productive.
A lot quicker. So you don't have to wait, right, for availability. You don't have to factor in traveling time, to meet the interviewers. It's a lot more productive. In fact, basically, in terms of you talk about interview process and how quick the end-to-end interview selection process is a lot quicker based on the changes pre-COVID.
Alex, can you tell us how can organisations reevaluate and improve their hiring practices? Are there any things that you feel that within your organisation that's being done really well that would work well in similar organisations?
I think given the current situation, a lot of organizations, as you have asked, have to relook at how they hire, especially now that you can't meet face-to-face. So I think that you find that there's a lot more online assessments, there's a lot more video calls, to Esther's point. It's about how do you engage from afar, right? So I think it's critical that companies have a process to be able to still continue to screen and meet virtually and then to discuss. So it's not to change the way you hire, but it's to change how you hire, leveraging on technology tools more. And so organization will definitely need to make sure that they have all these technology in place to be able to enable them to continue to hire as before. Of course, I think you'll be looking at attributes from candidates who are probably able to do better remote management of teams, because that's more critical today. If you're not going to be seeing your team day to day, and I think that's something that organizations need to ensure that they have that. So it's about how you communicate and how to ensure you have the tools to still reach out to the candidate pool.
And Michael, do you think with the adoption of these digital practices in terms of recruitment, are you finding that it's more of a challenge in the sense that since you're not meeting the individual face to face and you don't have that in-person feel that you typically would when interviewing a candidate?
I think it is more difficult, but I think everyone is adapting to it. And in all honesty, for Rakuten Mobile, we've been making extensive use of video conferences or video interviews previously. So prior to relocating to Singapore, I was doing a lot of interviewing for staff in Singapore from Tokyo. So out of necessity, I was doing that, and that was part of our plan. But we are going much heavier into it, and I would say it adds a little more friction to the process. In person is always preferable, but I think people are adapting to it, whether it's the candidate side or whether it's from the company side.
And Stephanie, could you share some tips perhaps of how would a potential candidate make a better impression in an online environment versus in person?
Yeah, so one of the tips that I can think of is for all candidates, when they attend a virtual interview, they should treat it like a real interview. In other words, they should put up their appearance, dress up properly, have eye contact with the interviewer, so that the interviewer will have the experience that, hey, the candidate is looking at me, the candidate has that presence, so that you can deliver the personality even across the virtual interview. That would be my advice to candidates who attend a virtual interview.
Just to add one point there, I think one thing that a lot of candidates don't do is verify the technology on their side. Simple things like connectivity issues. So I think as a candidate, I'd encourage them, make sure you have a good internet connection and you're in an environment, where your video, your voice is working properly.
In terms of some of the bigger challenges, Helen, tell us what do you foresee as some of the challenges for 2021?
So the biggest still being COVID and the impact that's had specifically on women. So the data's still emerging. We don't have a full picture yet, but the latest information is that women have been disproportionately impacted by COVID. So we make up 39% of the global workforce, but when it comes to job losses, we make up 54% of those job losses. So I think we're going to continue to see that impact in terms of women losing their jobs and therefore their ability to economically contribute to the household. So that's a big challenge. Beyond that, I think we're seeing the continued challenges of gender representation in the workplace. So this is going to compound that.
And it's interesting, you'd think that in this day and age that we'd be far more advanced than where we are. So is the correlation as a result of COVID, or is it something that we just haven't really caught up to, generally speaking?
So I think the impact of COVID is that the roles that women tend to do are the ones that are most impacted. So they're sort of frontline roles. And so easier, the first roles that as an organisation you would think about removing. The other challenge is what we call the triple burden. So what we know is for those women who are in work and in white collar work, they've now got the additional burden of, so they've got their work life, they've got their home life. So across Asia, we know that women do 4.1 times more of the unpaid childcare and domestic work versus men. So they've already had that additional workload on top of their paid work. But now they've got this extra burden where they're homeschooling or managing the impacts of COVID within their house. So I think what we're seeing is we're going to continue to see this trend. So whether it's because of the type of roles that women do, and those are the ones that are most impacted, or whether it's women making a choice to exit because it's just not possible for them to manage in a dual income household, it's just not possible for them to manage the burden at home along with the burden at work. So I think we're going to continue to see that throughout this year.
Yeah, that's a very good point, because I think the triple burden thing about having to juggle your work and the kids, homeschooling, and even just simple things like shopping for groceries, right? So, I mean, I like to think I did my part by buying an additional refrigerator so that she only needed to make less trips to the shops. But of course, I'm there also driving. The fact that the men are in town, they are not traveling as much. I think a lot have actually stepped up also. You see on social media how the fathers are actually, the one taking the kids out for a walk. So I think when it comes to, support system for actually women at work and all that, it's really important that the family is all behind that as well. So I think COVID really helped to to highlight the roles of women, especially in this society. And
I agree. I think it's a real opportunity. So there's a report by UN Women that showed women have reported that 50% of women have reported that the men in their lives have started contributing more, which is great. I mean, that's the way it should be. So that's a positive. It's not all doom and gloom.
yes.
And Esther, let me ask you, in terms of applicants, for example, if we're seeing an increase of job losses with women, how are you seeing that played out in terms of the number of applications that you're getting? That it's more skewed to you're getting more women applying for certain roles versus men, or has it remained the same?
I think for the nature of what we do, which is quite heavy technology and changed, the sector or the specialization itself, we have very few women, right? So just based on that, so yes, there are significant amount of job losses, across women, and not as much. It's just purely for the fact that there's already very few women in technology, basically. So there are, but I'm seeing more men actually. Losing their jobs, in the last year versus women, because I don't deal so much with frontline, like what Helen mentioned. So there are some, yeah, but not significant.
Since we're in the digital age and social media plays such an important role in what we're doing, is there anyone that would like to share the importance of having a presence online, for example, LinkedIn?
I think LinkedIn is a very good tool, and certainly for building a professional network. Certainly for us, as part of the screening process of candidates, that's something that we typically do look at. Obviously, that's not all we focus on, but we want to see some sort of participation, and it can show sort of a career advancement over time. It's, I'd say, an early way of getting an understanding of a candidate before going into a formal interview or looking at a detailed resume.
So in that sense, would you say it's critical to have a very up-to-date and professional LinkedIn page, because that is pretty much the first point of contact?
I would say so. It should be, and it's interesting because we find a lot of people, they'll when they're looking for work, then they will take the time to update and maintain it, and then once they're in a position, and I'm guilty of this myself, sort of put it to the side and don't spend a lot of time and effort on it. But we, in all honesty, you should be updating it regularly, and that is in a way a public face, your professional face to the world and to potential recruiters or potential new employers.
I mean, it's certainly important to have a social media presence today because, to my earlier point, employers would need to see who you are, what have you done. So, beyond just a LinkedIn, profile, I think it's good if you had some other online presence to showcase what you've done. Like if you're a writer or you're a PR person, have a blog, showcase what have you done in terms of communications, or if you're a designer, what are your design portfolio. And even you could be interacting online, hosting a tech forum or something like that if you are a technical person, So it's an opportunity for the employer to get more data points on you before they actually call you in for an interview. So definitely, have an online presence. And I think the number one tip is definitely check your grammar and spelling. Because there are employers out there who look at that as a data point as well.
And interesting also because with social media and this digital availability for everybody nowadays, it's such a great opportunity to get creative, but also show initiative. So by doing the things that you've just shared as a candidate, it's a chance to show your skill set, but also your determination and I guess your creativity in terms of what it is that you're doing. So
I think a lot of it is also showing that you're participating in a community, and a lot of online communities. So for example, if we're looking at hiring, say, developer staff, we'll look at what projects are they maybe contributing to, is it some GitHub projects, and we'll have some of our staff take a look at, what's their level of involvement, what are they really contributing to those communities as well. So I wouldn't necessarily focus just on the public face, but we want to see people who have passion and are expressing that professionally in a professional community.
Yeah, so to add on to what Michael and Lex has shared, I think professional social media presence is very, very important. And our company actually train their employees to put posts in LinkedIn. So this actually benefit the individual as well as the employer. So I think that LinkedIn is definitely a very, very important social media to showcase the employee as well as the employer's project that they have. Yeah. Just to add on the importance of social media presence.
Great way also to connect once you've joined an organisation for you to understand who your colleague is and their background and experience. I think by having that up-to-date LinkedIn profile, it's a great way for your colleagues to get to know your skill set. Esther, could you tell us what advice would you offer someone who has started a job but hasn't had to look for a role in 10 plus years?
Wow, I've come across a lot of that. Yeah, I mean, look at just say Singapore, right? So most of the candidates I work with are more mid to senior, so which means that it could be their first job for the last 15, 20 years. Don't even talk about 10 years. So and in most instances, it's like in two scenarios. One is that either I headhunt them, right, for a specific role, which means they do not have a CV, they have not gone for an interview for the last 10, 15 years or so, or someone else that has just lost their job after 15 years. So, I mean, if you ask me, the advice is, first thing, do you have a LinkedIn or, public profile, get one up. So some coaching, some advice there is definitely needed. So that's what I do quite a lot with a lot of these mid to senior candidates. Right, then really, really help them look and map out their options, right? And before even talking about career options, what do they really want to do, right? We talk about that because that will be their next step and next big career, right? Probably, for until they finish their career, basically. So that is very crucial. So I get them thinking whichever way, whether I headhunt them or whether whether they're looking for the next career, really to think what they want to do, from there, and then get them on social media. Most of them are not. You'll be surprised. And give them a bit more market information and get them ready.
So how do you find these individuals if they're not don't have any online presence?
Yeah, because I've been in this business long enough, maybe put it this way, that it's really, really through the referral network. So the network is very powerful and very, very strong. People know people. It's a small market, and that is first. That is one. Then of course there would be the other way, when I headhunt them are those that have some form of profile online, basically. So that's the other one. And of course is that you just know, right? If I'm looking for a head of somebody for another bank, the first usual suspect you would know, right? And thanks to, again, technology, it makes our work a lot easier today, as compared to, I don't know, 20 years ago, basically. So you can best guess, and you can hunt those people. But I must stress that referral network, the network that we built on, your first, second, third degree even, is so important.
Yeah, I think after 10 years, if you're trying to spruce up your LinkedIn profile, your online presence, one of the interesting features in LinkedIn as well is that they have a recommendations portion. So, and that's how you get connected to your referral network, because when you approach your friends or your colleagues or ex-bosses for referrals or recommendations rather, it gets them thinking too, hey, I know someone like TENTEN who can help you find a job, and then they will refer them in. So I think the recommendations is very important, because as a recruiter myself, I do actually look at who has recommended you, because these are people who are willing to publicly say something about you. I think it's very valuable. So if you are looking for a job, definitely get endorsements from people all around you.
So Stephanie, what are the common soft skills hiring managers are looking for?
I think what hiring managers are looking for, very important, is communication skill. Because at the end of the day, technical competency is something that you can train, but communication skill is something that they will prefer somebody to come with it of course, you can enhance it, but I think the soft skill, communication skill, EQ, all these are very, very important that what hiring managers are looking for, especially if they are recruiting for leaders to lead a team, then the people management skill are also very important. Yeah.
Yeah, I think for Rakuten Mobile, especially in Singapore, we are building a very international team. So it's certainly skills tied in that sense, but also able to work together with people of various nationalities and from very different backgrounds across, it is very much a global team that we have here and that we're looking to build.
In terms of a global team, when hiring within an organisation, diversity and inclusion is very important. And Helen, could you share with us what you're seeing in that space? Are companies doing enough?
So companies doing enough, I think it's yes and no. So some companies are doing great things. DBS does amazing when it comes to gender representation. I think it's less about how much they're doing and more about what sort of things they're doing. So what we see is that many organizations are focusing on initiatives that aren't really evidence-based, so they're not proven to work. So you'll find a sort of piecemeal sort of approach focused on sort of fixing the women as opposed to fixing the organization, often excluding men, and of course men are 50% of the solution, so we need to be drawing them in, and less sort of holistic and strategic. So what we're seeing is those organizations who are approaching it, they have a very clear target and focus, they have a strategy, they've put resource behind that strategy, and they're thinking carefully about what evidence-based solutions can they put into place to drive gender representation. Those are the ones that we're seeing are being most successful.
Yeah, that's very true. You need to have the right strategy, and I think important is the reason behind it. You need to answer that question: why diversity? How does it benefit the organization? Will it drive profits? Will it drive retention? I mean, there must be a goal in mind or an end, right? And one of the key things you need to do also as an organization who wants to push the agenda for diversity, it shouldn't just be hiring just to fulfill the agenda. You need to answer that why question. And at the same time, you need to get buy-in because people want to see the benefits of it. A hiring manager shouldn't be coming to you and saying, I want to hire for diversity and that's it. You need to really answer that question why. And then from there, set the strategy as Helen has pointed out. I think that way you get a more successful program running.
And what more can be done to drive change, do you think, Helen?
So focusing on those solutions that work. So for example, we know, Esther talked earlier about how it's difficult to find women in certain spaces, whether it's tech or whether it's finance. They are out there, they're just less, they network less. So we talked about the importance of LinkedIn. They're less likely to be putting themselves out there. They're focused very much on managing their triple burden, trying to do a good job, not setting the stall to make it clear that they're available to be hired. So I think it requires extra effort for organizations to find those women. But what we know is things like the interview process, making sure you're using structured interviews and skill-based assessments are both proven strategies that will drive better representation, whatever diversity dimension you're trying to hire. And we also know that when it comes to the final slate of candidates, you need more than one. So we hear lots of organizations with a target of we want at least one woman or one black person on our final slate of candidates. But the evidence shows that one woman has statistically no chance of success. But by having two, you double that chance, you get up to a 50% chance that you will hire a woman. So it's understanding what are those evidence-based solutions and focusing on those, rather than the things we typically see, which is, well, we'll have an employee resource group, or we'll celebrate International Women's Day, but not really baking that into sort of really fact-based strategies.
And how can companies be more supportive of their professional women and drive their success?
So again, it's a good question, but I worry about the question because it suggests that women need support. So it suggests that the problem is the women, and we need to give them some more help. We do need to recognize that women in workplaces face unconscious bias. So I think in most workplaces, sort of the old-fashioned overt bias we see less and less of that. What we see is companies with great intent, they want to see change, but then when they try, they're not making the progress they would hope for. And I think that's because they are focused on, let's support women, let's put women on leadership programs. There's sort of an assumption that maybe they don't have the right technical skills. So I think if they want to support women, they need to look at the entire organization, and they need to look at methods to de-bias things like recruitment, things like promotion, and they need to look at their competency models. So when you look at how you define leadership, often we find that it's defined in very masculine terms. And so looking across the entire organization, all its processes, and focused on de-biasing those is the best way to ensure that you're pulling more women through and retaining more women in leadership roles.
And in terms of inclusion, do you see a difference being in Asia, which is made up of many markets and countries and different ways of doing things and cultures? Do you find there's a distinct or a difference in terms of inclusion across Southeast Asia, for example, market to market?
So I think the challenge around inclusion is pretty much common everywhere. What we see is that a lot of organizations focus on the diversity because that's quite easy to measure. We just look at percentages. But what they're not focusing on is the inclusion part. How do we bring in that diversity because we know it's good for business? How do we then include it? Because if we can't include that diversity of thought, then we've wasted all that effort. We're not getting the benefits of it. So I think what organizations need to focus on is specifically what do we mean by inclusion? What are inclusive behaviors? And working with their leadership teams and their managers to explain, here's what inclusive behaviors look like. Here's how we can measure them. Here's how we can progress against them. And I think wherever we are in the world, whichever part of the world, I think that's benefit to all organizations and an area that requires additional focus.
In terms of some additional tips for candidates, Esther, could you share, apart from, doing the basics like researching the company and the hiring manager, what other things could candidates do?
What I always tell candidates is that, other than the basics, like what you just mentioned, researching candidate, is that you really need to engage with the interviewer, right? That's the first thing. Your mindset, before you go into any interview, has to be that you are already working for the company, and try to have a good discussion with the interviewer. What problem do they want to solve? Why do you need to hire the role and stuff like that? And put yourself in the shoes like you're already in that position, and then and discuss with your interviewer, because it could be your hiring manager, your peer at work, a key stakeholder whatsoever. It's somebody that you will work with day to day. So I think it's a both way communication. It's not just for the company, the client to assess the candidate, but it's also for the candidate to feel in that short 3-4 interviews whether is it a company that they want to work for. So we are talking about a long-term career, right? We're not talking about just plucking someone and putting someone in a place and see how it goes next 6 to 12 months. If it works, it's not like that. So I always advise candidate, please put yourself in the shoes, basically put yourself and make yourself as if like you're already working for the company. So wear that hat into interview.
Yeah, that's very true. I think I always find it useful to advise candidates to think about what have you done, how can you contribute to the organization, and a clear way of showcasing that is through case studies. Talk about a project that you did, and walk the interviewer through exactly what you did. Because most organizations in general are looking for problem solvers. So they want to know that, how did you do it, your methodology behind it, are you agile enough to then pivot to something different to find an alternate solution if you couldn't solve the problem initially? How do you, handle setbacks? How do you, deal with even maybe difficult people on the team? How do you earn trust with your stakeholders? These are all valuable insights into your character or your work style that employers will be looking at. So make sure, you think of examples and case studies that you can talk through in detail, because many of us can touch on things on a very shallow level, but when you start to deep dive and all that, it really changes things.
And is that down to a behavioural-based interviewing technique, the questions that are asked, and then you're looking to get a response from the candidate to see how they would handle a situation, or is that for just general better understanding?
I think it's a bit of both. So, I mean, behavioral is definitely very important because we always say that if somebody has done it before, chances of them to be able to repeat it, it's easier. And a lot of companies use the STAR format of interviewing, right? They want to know what situation you're in, what was the task that you did, what actions did you take, what were the results, good or bad, right? And then the second R is very important, the reflections. What did you do to reflect on it? How would you have done it differently? Because that's the strategic thinking part, because we don't always get it right. But how do you then deal with it, be it success or failure? How did you deal with it? Because if it's successful, how do you replicate it? If you fail, how do you not fail again? So these are the sort of thinking that we will look at. So yes, behavioral is important, but in general, your thought process is so important.
That methodology is really interesting because I think a lot of candidates are not familiar with it or don't understand that these essentially how the questions are devised. But as a candidate, if I was to know, then it'd make it a lot easier in terms of preparation. So do you find yourself coaching candidates in this respect?
Yep. That's where we really hope to bring value, rather than just send our clients a CV, right? Basically, regardless of experience level, I think that is what at least myself and try to get my team to do that as well.
Yeah, so to add on to what Esther and Alex has shared, I think it's also very important for the candidate to really have that proactiveness as well. Even after the formal interview, I think it's good to continue to have some level of interaction with the HR team or the hiring manager in such a way to show their constant so-called interest in the company as well as follow-up, etc. So you will create a good impression and engagement level that can be delivered to the company from the candidate. Yeah.
Can I ask a question? Because I give advice to women who are going for interviews, and I'm really interested to know from a receiving end perspective how this goes down. Okay, so I would say make sure you look at what gender representation in the organization looks like and ask questions in the interview about gender representation and other things that we know signal organizations who support it, things like flexible working policies, great parental leave. And the women I'm advising say, I can't ask that in an interview because then they're going to think that I'm difficult or tricky, or that I'm going to be, a candidate who's going to be like a hardcore feminist and perhaps I'm signaling that I don't want to work full time. So they worry about asking what I think are quite important questions. So I'm interested to know from the fellow panelists, if you get asked those questions, what's the perception of the candidate if they do that?
In all honesty, I don't recall having been asked those questions, but I would certainly welcome them. And I wouldn't necessarily recommend that a candidate do that in the first interview. But as it goes through the process and there's more of a relationship with the company, I certainly encourage that. And I think a company should be obligated to expect those questions and answer them honestly. Okay. And I think this ties to some of the earlier points as far as the preparation for that whole process. For me, some of the worst interviews is a candidate will sit down and explain, here's my background, and I'll about halfway through I'll ask, do you have any questions for me? And they say, nope. And it's like, really? Okay. That seems to me suggests that you're not really interested in having that conversation or really engaging. So I would certainly welcome questions like that.
Alex, could you tell us perhaps one of your most interesting candidates ever interviewed and what they did to impress you? What really stood out for you?
I think to the diversity point, right? I think the most interesting candidate I had was someone who was not a technical programmer or engineer, but she came in explaining that she's always been interested in tech, but because of her family background, they tend to push her into a more soft skills kind of comms degree rather than doing what she wanted to pursue. But what she did that impressed me was that on her own, she took up courses to learn coding and programming. And in that interview, she actually showed me an app that she created, and that really surprised me because I think that's a great way of showcasing, how you can actually get things done. And a lot of guys don't even do that, they just say that they can do it, but there's no evidence. And these days, because, we want evidence-based kind of interviewing and all, I think she really raised the bar there on it. So I think that's really important. Yeah.
And Esther, any experiences you can share, or perhaps some advice for hiring managers rather than candidates on how they can get the best pool of candidates for their organisation and how to work best with their representing recruitment agency?
Sure. I think, we're on the gender diversity topic, right? Basically, a lot of my clients, actually, I must say, majority come to me and say, hey, we need more gender diversity to be exact, right? And of course, we want to understand the goals behind that, so on and so forth. But then, from my angle, when I talk to candidates initially, couple of years back, it was quite straightforward. I just said, hey, my clients prefer female. I was very direct, and they're like, after a while, the females actually get quite offended. So, am I being hired because I'm a female? Am I getting an interview because I'm female, or because I really have the skill, the right talent? So there was a few that was a bit more vocal and actually said that you should rephrase it, and I learned from the process, basically. But just also to answer your question is that I think my clients, yes, even though they say female do not automatically get hired because they're female. It's just part of the selection process, right? In a mix, basically. Most of the clients that I work with, still best man get a job, the best talent, the best fit, whether man, female, whoever get the job, basically. So yeah.
And to your earlier question about what else should a candidate prepare beyond doing the research on the company and the interviewer that they're meeting, I think it's important when you're doing your research on a company to look at what is the cultural diversity, agenda, or demographics of the company from your research, what Helen mentioned. And the other one is about the values. Because we are very fortunate to actually live in a multicultural region here, where every country you see it's very diverse in its makeup and demographics. But what actually brings a company together effectively is its values. So in an interview, you should be able to also show the interviewer how do you align to the company's values? Because one of the, unfortunately, check boxes in an interview is actually, does this person align with our values? So that's a tip for, job seekers if you want. Make sure you know what are the values of the company, be it the 5 that you find in DBS or, 14 in Amazon and things like that. So I think that's really important.
Yeah, I really second what Alex said. So even as a very small company, right, TENTEN, when we select our staff, whether back office or our consultants, we look at the individuals, whether they can fit into our current mold and culture. Because being a very small company, that is so important. That's how the company can grow, right? Really on the core values. So that is important. Yeah. Again, we highly, strongly support females again, to come back into the workspace. We provide, total, full flexibility. Doesn't mean you work part-time, right? But you have flexi working hours, right? Knowing how women are so good in multitasking. We wear 3-4 hats, mother, helper, whatever, I myself, I run a company, for example. So there's a lot of hat that we wear, and so yes, to answer your question.
So to answer your question, as a hiring manager, I think it's very, very important definitely to look for the value in the candidate as well to ensure that it's a match. So speaking on behalf of Rakuten Mobile, we are a fast-growing company. We have the backup of Rakuten Group, but we are also a startup in a sense. So we are looking for people who has the drive, who has the initiative, who can work in a sometimes unstructured organization typical of any startup. So looking for the right match in terms of candidate who has the right value to be successful in their journey with us is also very important as a hiring manager.
I think that's a good sort of general point, for any candidate, is to know the company that you want to apply to and know yourself. So what environment are you going to be most successful in, and what's the match of the cultures for it? And if it's a company, it might be a big name company, but if it doesn't have the same values that you do, you probably should think again.
Fantastic. So as we wrap up now, I'm just going to ask each of you individually, starting with Stephanie, is there anything else you'd like to share or add, whether it's from a hiring manager perspective or anything that could potentially help candidates?
Yeah, so I think it's very important for all candidates to do their research, to know the company, to engage the interviewer, and to do follow-up. That is my quick summary of the tips to the candidates looking for a job.
Is there anything else you'd like to add? As it just generally on the topic of recruitment in 2021.
For recruitment in 2021, I foresee it will be similar to 2020 in terms of like the recruitment process. Mainly will be still a virtual interview. Maybe you will have some face-to-face interview, but that will still be the minimum. So I think it will be good for candidates to continue to be fully prepared. Like what Michael said, make sure the technicality is operating well before the actual interview, and be prepared physically for the interview. Have a great time presence with the interviewer, even during virtual session. Yeah. Thank you.
And Alex, in terms of what are you seeing in 2021? Any emerging trends?
I think, with the proliferation of big data, right? I think as a candidate, when you're applying for a job also, you need to provide as much data to the company as possible. So maybe I'm a bit old school, but I believe that, even like reference letters are important. So if you can get as much reference letters as you can from your past employers, please do, because that's valuable. The other point is don't restrict yourself to just a 1-page or 2-page CV, because if you've got 10 years of experience, I don't think it will fit on one page. And to give the recruiter or the hiring manager enough data to consider shortlisting you out of the thousands of candidates that have written in, how you differentiate yourself that way is also to put relevant information in the CV or resume, and make sure that you showcase as much as you can of the relevant experience that you have. So even if it exceeds 2 pages, don't worry about it. We've got computers to help read as well.
Helen, anything you'd like to add?
So I like to say advice for organisations and then advice for women. So for organisations, I think it is taking time to understand the evidence-based solutions. So if you genuinely want to see more diversity within your organisation, understanding those things around the recruitment process that work, such as structured interviews and skill-based assessment, and making sure you've got more than one candidate on the final slate. And for women, I think it's building on what we talked about earlier in terms of networks. So what research shows is that women versus men don't put as much time and effort into building a network. And we talked earlier about how we don't look at our LinkedIn profile until we're looking for a job. And so it's for women to intentionally understand that the value of a network helps you in getting your current job done, but also in looking for future opportunities. So spending time on top of everything else they're doing, but to recognizing it's something that they need to put time and effort into if they want to have the value out of it, which is being visible when roles are on offer. So it's to put that extra effort into intentionally and strategically thinking about how do I build a network, and using tools like LinkedIn to make sure that they keep that strong all the time.
Actually, I wanted to add for organizations, because she reminded me something that you shouldn't just be hiring for the sake of hiring diversity, right? You need to also have a follow-through, create a sense of belonging, the right environment. Because even if you do succeed in hitting your diversity hiring goals, do you have an inclusive environment? Have you removed unconscious bias within your organization? So you need to, as an organization, we also need to look internally. Do we have the right environment? Are we creating the right sense of belonging for everyone? So that's, I think, very important.
I think for some advice, general advice for candidates would be to know what you want and be able to communicate that effectively in an interview and as you're going through the process of looking at what position or which companies you want to work for. And if you do have time, so you're between jobs, spend that time to improve your skills. So if you know what you want, then focus on improving skills, which are going to put you in a better position to be successful in that job.
I mean, as a career advisor, I think most important is, I think you mentioned across the panel, is network, really, seriously. So, I mean, you don't go out. I mean, sometimes network doesn't mean you need to go out and socialize with big group people party. It's not that way, but it could even be just your sister, your brother, your cousins, your immediate friends, like that. A lot of people, especially female, even like you just box yourself up, right? Every day, just do your own thing, go home, take care of your own kids. I'm talking about middle-aged women like myself, but you need to get yourself out there, right? It's both way. One is for your own well-being. That's one thing. The other thing is it's the relationships that you build that will you just need to hear what's out there in the market, right? That's how you learn, you prepare yourself, whether for interview, whether for whatever. So the network is so important and very powerful.
And also about creating that awareness, so letting people know that you're looking for a
Yeah.
job. Nobody's going to come to you with something
Of
if they
course.
don't think you're, you're wanting to leave.
Yeah, like I'm exploring, right? Whatever, whether you want to come back out to work or whether you're like, hey, what's going on out there? If you don't just make an effort, then it will not happen, right? Basically.
Thank you so much. That was fantastic. Really great responses. Well, thank you very much for joining us today on our discussion series around recruitment in 2021. Thank you to TENTEN Partners for hosting this session. Thank you.